Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to tonight's class on Inferno. This is session number 15 in our Mythgard Academy discussion of Inferno, and glad you guys could be with me here this evening. So I just looked up and realized my light went out. So I'm a little tiny bit darker than usual here tonight, but that's okay. I can live with it. So before I start tonight, just one quick announcement, or really reminder, because I've already announced it, and that is that Mythmoot registration is open. We are taking registration for Mythmoot 8. Very excited to get to see folks again. Mythmoot was a lot of fun last year, even though we were completely digital last year, and maybe again, we're not sure. We're definitely looking forward to it. You can go to signumuniversity.org/Mythmoot, and you will find all the information there, the registration information, the guests of honor, well, we don't have the schedule yet, of course, exact schedule, but you can see where you can apply, where you can propose to do a presentation, and all kinds of things. So there we go. I encourage you to look into that. Just a reminder, we are planning to make a final determination by the end of March as to whether or not we're going to try to do any in-person component this year. We're not ruling it out. I don't know how likely it is, but we're gonna continue exploring that, seeing how things unfold. We're eager to get back to in-person moots as soon as we can, but we'll see what happens. In any case, our digital options are going to be open no matter what. So we encourage people to sign up for Mootcast and MootHub now, and then of course maybe there will be an upgrade later, maybe there won't. Who knows? Karita, I agree. Karita says we like the dark for dark business, and if hell isn't dark business, I don't know what is. Yeah, true enough. So anyway, we're gonna continue. We were in the pouch of the simonists last time, which you can still see over my shoulder here. Those with their feet sticking up in the air and their feet on fire. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Jocelyn says, is there info yet about the book after Inferno? Well, that's an interesting question, because of course, on what we have been doing, of course, we've been doing Tolkien every other session, so we're sort of scheduled to go on, having finished Morgoth's Ring, to the War of the Jewels, Volume 11 of the History of Middle-earth after this. But we'll see. I'm not 100% sure. We'll see what happens there. There's some other possibilities that I'm talking through with some folks. But we'll definitely have some more discussion about that afterwards. Yeah, Serena. Well, no, Serena, we couldn't go straight to Purgatorio. Purgatorio hasn't won an election yet. We could, of course, go on to Purgatorio, but that's a separate book. As we've defined it. Yeah, no, that's not legal. But we can see what we're doing. We're talking about a year from now, at least, Tomas. Not so bad as that. Although we're not going at quite the pace I'd originally hoped, we are nevertheless not. We're well over halfway through already, so we're fine. We should be only in the 20s, I think. In our we've been averaging about a canto and a half a night, basically. So that's where around, I suspect, where we're likely to end up, and that's going to put us, as I say, somewhere in the mid-20s for sessions. So only a couple more months, we'll be good. One thing that I wanted to mention, though, there's been a change. Okay, this is going to shock nobody. There's a change since the originally posted schedule. But more importantly, not a change to the reading schedule, which shocks nobody, but rather a change to my schedule. Originally, I was not going to be able to be here next week, but I am going to be here now. So we will have, I'm going to change the GoToWebinar thing. We're gonna do we're gonna be able to have class next week. So I wanted to make sure to mention that at the beginning, and I'll try to remember to mention it again at the end. We are gonna do class next Wednesday night. So anyway, okay, all right. Let's let's get back to the simonists here. All right. This is the passage we finished. We almost finished with this last time. Oh, that's right. And I wanted to apologize. This is, weren't we? Was this the passage I was just? I'm sure all my broadcasts are running together, but I'm pretty sure that I was in the middle of finishing this up when all of a sudden my internet went out and I cut off in mid-sentence last time, as I seem to recall. We had a very abrupt end of our discussion last week. Yeah, that was I just had like an arbitrary internet outage, which didn't last that long, but it lasted about 10 minutes, and I was like, I went all Aragorn on it, and I was like, I shall take this as a sign that it's time to. I was like, it's just a couple minutes away from ending class anyway. Yeah, so sorry about the I figured by the time my internet came back, I'm like, it's all right. It's now like, was way after midnight, and I figured most folks were gone already, so I just left it. But anyway, so we'd gotten all the way through, except we hadn't talked about the breaking of the basins. So we were looking at the way in which he's depicting simony as an inversion, right? This is all about the upside down here in 19 and Canto 19. Those who have been convicted of simony, right? Who have been sent down here among the simonists. We've got the baptismal fonts, right? Or excuse me, the holes in the ground that are the same shape as, or the same size as baptismal fonts. So they are recalling baptismal fonts. So you've got them shoved in there head first, the mostly popes, right, shoved in there head first. And so we're looking at this like the inversion of baptism, right, where baptism is the means by which individual people enter into the body of Christ, and then the fire descends from heaven upon their feet, right? Instead of upon the head, as in Pentecost, in the book of Acts, chapter 2, fire descends from heaven onto the heads of the apostles, and that's the moment when the church begins, basically. So you have those two things, baptism and Pentecost, these two kind of baptizing moments when the apostles are baptized by fire from above, and when the infant, of course, is baptized with water to enter into the church. Those two things are sort of combined but inverted. It's death instead of birth. It's the feet instead of the head. It's a form of torture instead of. And we even have the oil. Like we're talking about the description of the fire on the feet as if they were coated in oil, right? Like the consecrating oil, which is put not on the feet, but on the head of the of priests when they're ordained. Yeah. Gerald says, I looked at the fonts last week. I don't see how anyone could drown. An infant, I think, is the one that could drown. It would be hard to drown in a baptismal font. Anyway, so, so Stephen, I do agree. We have what seems to be an irony, which at least sort of rhymes with these other ironies and inversions that we're getting in here. That is, the idea of somebody drowning to death in a baptismal font is intensely ironic, right? Him saving the life of a person who is drowning in a baptismal font. So let's kind of think of the elements, because that isn't it's a weird ending. right? It's a weird ending. It all works pretty well, especially in the context, right, of the like divine artistry of all these things that he's praising in those first three lines, and you know the way that we're looking at these ironies and paradoxes and inversions that are being associated with simony here, because of course the simonists themselves are turning things inside out. They're turning things upside down. They are supposed to be leading people towards salvation, but the act of simony is not just them leading people in the other direction. It's not just them deceiving people and leading them towards damnation instead of salvation. It's a sharper inversion than that. The act of simony is perverting the very sort of mechanism that has been established by God through the church, right? Has been established by God as the mechanism to bring people towards salvation. And that very mechanism is itself being turned on its head, being used instead of as a way to serve God's servants. It is being used as a way to exploit them for your own personal gain. So the way in which simony is this kind of deep perversion, deep inversion of the entire spiritual process is clearly what Dante's picking up here. But as we said, it's he ends with he segues into this personal anecdote, right? I was about to say it was all going swimmingly, but you know, that's probably shouldn't say it that way, until he refers specifically to the baptismal fonts in San Giovanni, which is fine. Okay. Gives us a more concrete image, perhaps, especially if we're local and familiar with those. But then it's that final set, right? And one of these, not many years ago, I broke for someone who was drowning in it, and let this be my seal to set men straight. Okay, so he was accused. I mean, he's making it sound like he was accused of some kind of, act of impiety or sacrilege or something that he, and of course we know he's been saying that he's been falsely accused of many things during the course of his own banishment. But he received this wrongful reputation, right? But he only did it, right? Yes, he did smash one of the baptismal fonts in San Giovanni, but he did it in order to save the life of somebody who is drowning. So he's trying to set the record straight. And again, I said from apostrophe to anecdote, right? It's this whole section, this passage that I'm quoting here, starts with this extremely lofty address to God himself, right? And then all the way down to self-justifying personal anecdote, which has the initial feeling of a kind of non sequitur, right? Like, okay, wait, this did not go in the direction, did not end up anywhere near where I thought we were headed, right? Anyway, so the, but it's clearly not irrelevant, right? There are several ways in which this seems to me really, quite interesting and in many ways very, very much sort of in keeping. What he did, right? Think about what he did for a second. An act of sacrilege, right? Shattering a baptismal font, which he did in order to save the life of a person. So by him raising his hand to strike against, in a sense, strike against one of the sacraments of the church, right? In order to save life. And so that itself is another kind of inversion, right? If you come and you shatter, if as an act of vandalism, you came in and shattered the baptismal fonts, right? It would be, an act of sacrilege against that church, but more like symbolically speaking, it's as if you are trying to stop the mechanism of salvation, right? And these sacraments are, make no mistake, the sacraments are the mechanisms of salvation. Like that's the system. That's how it works. That is what God has ordained through his church. So if you are striking out against baptism, if you are raising your hand against baptism and shattering the baptismal fonts, you are standing in the way, essentially, right, of baptism. You are preventing souls from being saved and entering the church. So it has the look of someone who has committed a sacrilegious act and in doing so undermined the sacraments of the church. But Dante says, no, I need to set men straight on this, right? I did that because someone was drowning in it, right? That, like, this was not me acting against the sacrament. This was me saving life instead of allowing life to be destroyed. And again, now notice therefore the parallel between like the kind of image that Dante is fighting against, the blasphemous sacrilegious image, right? Because notice that, like, what he's doing, he sets up the false understanding of himself as a parallel to the popes, to the Simonist popes. They are the ones who have attacked the sacraments through their simony, by taking money, right? By utilizing the sacraments themselves as a mechanism for personal gain, to enrich themselves. That's what simony is, right? They are the ones who have been sacrilegiously striking against that, undermining these very things. So this image of the shattering of the baptismal font is like an image of what the popes themselves do, right? Except again, so Dante's kind of taking that thing that he's been accused of and he's kind of flipping it back towards them. He's like, yes, that is a horrible thing, isn't it? But actually, I know you are, but what am I? Right? I mean, he really kind of reverses it on them. And he, of course, was saving lives. And that's what the popes, that's what the prelates are supposed to be doing, right? Is saving lives through the sacraments. I don't understand it, David. That also would be my impulse too. If a baby were drowning in a stone font, I would be also tempted to reach in for the baby rather than break the font. But that symbolically doesn't work nearly so well, I think, as this. But anyway, I'm not making any comment on the historicity of Dante's claim, what did or did not happen in the Church of San Giovanni. But anyway, the way that it sort of symbolically functions in the Simonist context does, seem to me relatively clear with this especially with this interaction with the sacraments. Divorce, I can imagine there might be a divorce, like maybe it was like wedged in somehow. It's possible. Yeah, I'm not saying there couldn't be a circumstance in which that would not be exactly the right and best way to solve the problem. Okay. So, let's keep going. Out from the mouth of each hole there emerged a sinner's feet, and so much of his legs up to the thigh. The rest remained within. Both souls of every sinner were on fire. Their joints were writhing with such violence they would have severed withes, withes and ropes of grass. As flame on oily things will only stir along the outer surface, so there too that fire made its way from heel to toes. And there's the reference to the oil, which I already mentioned. Again, the burning as if it were something coated with oil, which again recalls the oil of consecration for these who are all priests. I mean, it's almost impossible to commit the act of simony if you're not a priest. So that's kind of, it's actually an interesting question. Is it possible for a lay person to be guilty of simony? I suppose in theory you could probably work out how to do it, but it's not, sort of normal. And no, Serena, I do not believe that the soul pun works in Italian. I indulged I indulged in the soul pun here, but I don't believe it. I was kind of looking at that, and unless I'm wrong, and again, I don't really have Italian, so as I've been admitting all the way along, someone who knows Italian better could perhaps correct me on this, but I don't think that it works. But yeah. Could you try to bribe your way into the priesthood? Yes, but yes. I guess if you attempt to bribe your way into the priesthood and fail, you're still technically a layperson and guilty. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, of course, Stephen, you're right. Simon Magus himself wasn't part of the clergy, so I guess we have one example right in front of us there. Yeah, yeah. Anyway, yeah. No, as I said, I'm pretty sure the soul. I don't think the soul pun works in Italian. Okay. Now, I just have a question. I don't think I've ever really understood. So I get the upside down business, right? The inversion. That all makes sense to me. And the image of the burning feet, like the sort of punitive version, right? This sort of inversion of the fire from heaven descending on the apostles. That all works for me. Like I can fit that all together into the whole simony thing. But the burning feet never really made sense to me, in a sense. As I said, the inversion thing I get. What I don't get is well, I don't know. Maybe I'm making too. Maybe it is enough. Maybe that inversion is enough. But it just this description in particular, with the way that he describes them, sort of thrashing around. Oh, Stephen, you might be right. That's a really good one. Okay, because I was gonna what I was saying is, as what we have seen in the punishments so far, right? Specifically, like the torments that people are undergoing, right? The torments that people are undergoing tend to be, as we've seen, a sort of perpetuation, a perpetuation of the sin, right? Kind of like unleashing them to, continue the damage on themselves that they were doing by sinning through their sins. And that's the element, again, that although like as an image, the popes upside down with their burning feet up in the air made sense to me. As like a metaphor, in a sense, for simony, it worked. It's always worked for me. As a punishment, in this way, right? As a, how is the torment connected with their sin exactly? Was a little bit less clear. Yeah, good. Oh, awesome. Stephen Cover, Michael Dennis, and Sarah Duncan all in a row have some really, really great points. And I think I agree with all of you. All three of them are recalling Bible passages that seem relevant to the foot question. One is Michael Dennis is saying it could be an inversion of foot washing in some way. A really important, sort of prominent passage in the Gospels, which has Jesus washing the feet of the disciples, and he is enjoining them to wash the feet of others as well. And that foot washing ceremony, that sort of very humble act of service to wash the feet of others, is one of the things that is kind of used to characterize that, essentially the priestly duty, like to be a minister, right? To be, which means the word minister means servant. And I sorry, by the way, I went to give a little gloss on something that I said earlier. I said that the prelates, their job is to be the servant of God's servants, rather than trying to, cash in on God's servants. Servant of God's servants is an English translation of one of the titles of the Pope. Servus servorum, servus servorum Dei, the servant of the servants of God. I mean, that's how it is understood. So that concept of foot washing, right? That you to wash the feet of others. That the concept of selfless, humble service towards others, which the washing of feet with water represents, and the way in which that is inverted by the popes who are guilty of simony, the prelates, the clergy who are guilty of because I don't think there are 100% popes in this whole pouch, but I don't think there have been enough popes to fill this entire pouch. But anyway, the Simonist priests are again inverting that relationship, right? Where they are supposed to be serving, they're supposed to be giving, they're taking. Where they're supposed to be humbly seeking the good of others, instead they are proudly seeking the good of themselves. And so to have the water with which they are supposed to be bathing the feet of others instead turned to fire that is coating their feet. That seems to me very relevant, Michael. And Stephen, I agree. Surely not every pope. I do suspect that there are fewer than 100% of the popes who end up here in this pouch. But anyway, okay, so that's one of the things. Stephen had also said before, in thinking about feet, we'd been talking about the armor of God. When Dante's belt got chucked into the abyss, remember, we were talking about that very allegorical armor of God passage from Ephesians and the belt of truth, right? Which seemed certainly relevant to the fraud question and even the allegory issue that was being raised surrounding that. In that same allegorical passage, there's a foot reference in there too. You've got the shield, you've got this the sword, you've got the belt of truth that we mentioned, you've got the breastplate, you've got the helmet, but you also have shoes. What is strapped to your feet is the preparation of the gospel of peace. And this, I think, is also connected to the other passage that Sarah Duncan was remembering, that how beautiful are the feet of those that bring good news. Yes, that the feet are associated, through both of those passages, feet are associated with bringing the gospel, bringing the good news, bringing the good news of peace to others. Again, that's the work that, among other things, priests are meant to be doing. Now their feet their burning feet are all that we see. I don't know, it doesn't seem like their feet are especially beautiful at this point. But once again, we see this kind of inverted. So in these things, these connections to the feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace, and the beautiful feet bringing good news, and the foot washing thing, Michael, that you were saying, there I can see, like, just as you have not only neglected but reversed these things, right? You've not only failed, right? I mean, to fail would be one thing, but you have exploited, right? You have yourself deliberately perverted the role that you were supposed to have. Your feet have done the opposite of what they were supposed to do. And so that helps me understand the burning feet sticking up, I think, a great deal better. Yeah. Well, Devore, the shoving down, I think we'll get to the shoving down. But yeah, that's a tricky bit. Let's keep going. Here comes possibly the most controversial passage in the entire, that is the most risque thing that Dante says. No, I don't think, well, people could have different opinions about this, of course, though, but it's hard for me to imagine saying something much more risque than this on several levels. Dante addresses the feet, right, of one of the dudes. Whoever you may be, dejected soul, whose head is downward, planted like a pole, my words began, do speak if you are able. I stood as does the friar, who confesses the foul assassin, who, fixed fast, head down, calls back the friar, and so delays his death. And he cried out, Are you already standing there, O Boniface? The book has lied to me by several years. Are you so quickly sated with the riches for which you did not fear to take by guile the lovely lady than to violate her? And I became like those who stand as if they have been mocked, who cannot understand what has been said to them, and can't respond. Okay, are you already standing there, O Boniface? The Pope, the dude who's planted like a pole in the ground, is the previous Pope. Okay, the Pope, the guy for whom the current Pope, Dante's particular friend, right, the one who is Dante's big enemy, as we've talked about before, Boniface, is of course the name of that current Pope. So his predecessor is already down here in the circle of the Simonists, and his predecessor, hearing the pitter-pat of feet approaching, says, "Oh, Boniface, is that you? You're early." Right? The Boniface, the Pope, is still alive. And so Dante, in this passage, is in fact saying that the current Pope is destined for not only hell, but here, right? The previous Pope has just been waiting for Boniface to show up, and it's only a matter of time before he gets down there. As I say, I don't think there's much more outrageous that Dante says, because it's not just a question of Dante, saying that the sitting Pope is definitely going to hell, right? That would be controversial under any circumstances, but keep in mind that this would be presumptuous and outrageous to say of anyone, right? You can never know the eternal destiny of anybody before they die, right? Because there is always the chance. Even Boniface, right? Who, even if he is just as bad as Dante believes that he is, right? He's not dead yet. He could still repent. It could happen, right? It could happen. And of course, in theory, it's Dante's job to hope that happens, even to pray for that to occur. But yes, Stephen says, I'm sure this was all taken in good humor. Yeah, no, I'm sure Boniface saw the funny side of all this. Yeah. So yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal. As I've said before, I sometimes used to refer to this passage when I've talked before. I mean, I know I talked weeks ago about the whole, like, people getting in trouble for criticizing the church thing, and how modern people always assume that, like, the power of the medieval church was like absolute, and you could never put a foot wrong or else you'd get burned at the stake. So not true. The medieval church was so not as monolithic as it wanted to be, and especially as some of the popes tried to make it. But I mean, this is so yeah. Whenever people would say like, "Isn't Chaucer going to get in trouble for saying that one thing that he just said?" You know, in criticizing priests or monks or something like that, I would sometimes refer to this passage in which Dante condemns to hell the sitting pope, and be like, you know, see, like, yeah, and Dante didn't get burned at the stake, so there you go. He was already banished, right? But yeah, that Sylvia, yes, he's not afraid of the Pope. Dante feels the strength of his convictions here, right? It is clearly the Pope who is in the wrong. Yeah. So David, yes, the souls in hell know the future. Remember, we talked about that. We talked about that with the heretics, I believe. It was the heretics who cued us into this, that they don't know what's happening they only see the future and they don't see the present, right? That anyway was what we were told when we were meeting Cavalcante de Cavalcante, who was worried about his son Guido and didn't know if his son Guido was dead or not. So anyway, yes, the implication was that the what we were told was that the future was revealed to them. And there are several people, I mean, Dante's been getting prophecies off of a bunch of folks that he's been meeting. In fact, it's one of his favorite topics of conversation with the damned souls that he has been interviewing, certainly over the last the last maybe 10 cantos. So yes, their knowledge of the future is, and it's not like, you know, it's not like magical. They do receive this from the divine omniscience as part, it seems, of their punishment, as part of the consequences of being in hell. And Serena, this brings us to your very interesting point. I'm not going to discuss it fully because we're not to Canto 20 yet, but yeah, Serena's saying we get between Canto 19 and 20, we get this sort of pivot. Simon Magus, as I've said, is Simon the mage, Simon the sorcerer, is the dude after whom the sin of simony is named. Serena's pointing out that in these two consecutive Bolgia, these two consecutive pockets, we get like first the Simon and then the Magus. He's emphasizing the simony element here with the popes, and then he's emphasizing the Magus bit, the sorcery bit, the divination bit in the next canto, in the next pouch. And so Serena's question was, is there any implication that the popes could almost as easily slide over into the next pouch if they're practicing Christianity as if it's a mechanistic type of magic? It's really tricky, Serena, in so many ways, because of course, if there's somebody who's guilty of mechanistic magic, if there's somebody who's guilty of a sort of pagan foretelling, it's Dante here, right? And again, we'll come back to this when we're looking at Canto 20, but it's one of the things that's really interesting to me about this whole section. I've talked before about how sometimes people will sort of flippantly say, and of course this is one of the very, very most famous examples of this, that Dante just he just puts all of his political enemies in hell, right? That it's a tour of the underworld is particularly useful when you can use it in that kind of way for political invective. And again, like saying that the current pope is gonna end up in hell is a big fat example of that. Yeah, but what I was saying about that before is that I think that's way too simplistic a view of things. He's not just doing that. And one of the primary reasons, one of the primary ways in which I say it's too simplistic, is that I think that Dante is thoroughly and consistently way too self-aware for that. He is not just somebody who's, and that was the context, I'm pretty sure, in which I brought this up. In fact, I'm pretty sure I brought it up when we were talking about Filippo Argenti and his condemnation of Filippo Argenti, who is his political enemy. And yet I was emphasizing the way in which, in doing that, in the very act of doing that, he was implicating himself as well. I think that Dante is very rarely does this kind of thing. He's not often hypocritical accidentally, would be another way of saying it. So I, for one, have a hard time believing that Dante makes this deterministic sounding statement here next to the writhing feet of the previous pope, immediately next door to the place where the determinists go when they die, and is like completely oblivious to that. I don't think that happens by accident. I think he's much more self-aware. And remember Geryon. You remember what we were looking at in that whole, we spent a whole night talking about that canto, his ride on Geryon's back and his comparing of himself to Phaeton and to Icarus. I think he's aware of the dangers that he's running and of the problems that exist here. Yeah, interesting, David. That's a really fascinating comment. David Antley says, is part of this determinism maybe due to how difficult it is to repent of simony? You can't be forgiven if you're continuing the sin. Yeah, and I would add, David, on top of that, you can't be forgiven if you have perverted the mechanism of forgiveness, which is the big problem with simony. Yes. How are you going to repent when repentance is the way you make your money, right? That's right. That's the problem. And so is he pointing that out, that like basically Boniface through his simony has painted himself into a metaphysical corner? How is a simonist to repent? How is one who has undermined the mechanism of repentance itself going to go about repenting? Yes. And William, absolutely, this is making indulgences more and more uncomfortable. Yes, exactly. It wasn't just Martin Luther who was uncomfortable with indulgences. This is something, by the way, again, Martin Luther gets a lot of press about this, and understandably so. That was not... Martin Luther didn't say a new thing. Martin Luther said a thing particularly strongly at the right place at the right time, is what happened. There was almost nothing Martin Luther said that hadn't been being said for centuries before Martin Luther. The exact concern that I'm describing, the problem of simonists, essentially, it's not the terminology this particular poet uses, but anyway, the problem that this creates with the undermining of the vehicle of repentance itself, of penitence itself, was a major theme of one of my other favorite Middle English poems, Piers Plowman, which was written within decades of the Commedia. It was early, few decades, first half anyway of the 14th century. And he is super, super concerned. Friars are his deal. He's really worried about friars, which ironically Dante compares himself to a friar. This is him leaning down, right, like a friar, listening to the confession of a foul assassin, of a murderer, right, who is upside down, and is calling back the friar, right, to try to delay his death. Anyway, friars were William Langland's big concern, but the issue was the same, David, that you were pointing to. Like, how do you repent when penitence itself, when the sacrament of confession and of absolution has been wrecked, has been undermined, and that is, the Simonists are doing that. Okay. Let's keep going. Then tell me now, how much gold did our Lord ask that St. Peter give to him before he placed the keys within his care? Surely the only thing he said was, "Follow me." And Peter and the others never asked for gold or silver when they chose Matthias to take the place of the transgressing soul, that is, Judas. Stay as you are, for you are rightly punished, and guard with care the money got by evil that made you so audacious against Charles. And were it not that I am still prevented by reverence for those exalted keys that you held within the happy life, I'd utter words much heavier than these, because your avarice afflicts the world, it tramples on the good, lifts up the wicked. Your avarice afflicts the world. Simony is a big, big problem. Again, remember the imagery of, which we've mentioned before, of the church as the bride of Christ. And remember, Serena, the proximity of this pouch, not only to the pouch of the diviners next door, but of the panders and seducers, right? A couple pouches over. There is a very clear parallel there as well, that they have, if not seduced the bride of Christ themselves, have at least been pandering. They've been pimping the bride of Christ. It's a big deal. Of course, the references to St. Peter. St. Peter is, St. Peter the Apostle is the first pope. St. Peter is very, very closely associated with the Pope. And so going back to St. Peter twice, St. Peter was never asked for money by Jesus when he was given, the commission that he was given. And Peter himself never asked of money from others. And he gives the example not of Simon Magus, which, if I'm remembering correctly, was Peter who was rebuking Simon Magus, but of Matthias, who in chapter 1 of Acts is the replacement apostle chosen to fill Judas's spot after Judas dropped out. Serena says, glad he's holding back here. I know it is. It's I can't help but myself be tempted to say, okay, so what would the heavy words look like, right? What exactly is he holding back here? Dvorak, that's a really fascinating point. Dvorak says, I think this is only the second time he's rebuked a shade. And we agreed that the first time he did it, it was sketchy. That was the Filippo Argenti one that I was just referring back to, the wrathful dude whom he wanted to see, whom he was delighted to see soused in the broth, right? And Dvorak says the first time it was sketchy. This time it doesn't seem sketchy. No, not in the same way. I mean, it's and certainly Dvorak not in the way that it was then, right? The sketchiness. The first time with Filippo Argenti was all about the way in which he was mirroring Filippo Argenti, right? Like, I'm going to get really angry in the circle of the wrathful is a bad look, right? That can't be a good sign. I'm sorry, it just can't, right? I'm going to try to lunge forward and beat up the person who's like violently flailing out and beating up other people. Like it's, yeah, like that's not good. He's not implicating himself of simony here, right? In the same way. So like I agree. He is sort of standing aloof. The one way, Devora, in which it's, I don't know, can something be a little bit parallel? Maybe it can be. A tiny bit parallel is the connection to the friar that he mentioned before, right? Again, what's depicted here in this image, Dante's posture as he is leaning down and leaning over and listening. He is standing and leaning down and listening to the Pope like a friar who is listening to the confession of a doomed criminal, right? And so, in other words, he is adopting to the dead Pope a clerical position, right? A clerical role. And so that's a little bit interesting, I think, Devora, in this context, because again, it's a person hearing confession, right? The friar hearing confession, that he is comparing himself to. So yeah, I'm going to hear the confession of the Pope, right? And then he gives him a lecture, right? Then he tells him like why that thing that you did is very, very bad, right? He is adopting a at least priest-like role here with the previous Pope. And that is kind of interesting. Now, Devora, he's not implicating himself of simony in the same way. Is he? I don't think so. I mean, he's not taking money, obviously. No one's greasing his palm here. Yeah. Yeah, Devora points out both times Virgil heartily supports him. Yes. Though I have the same reaction that you do, Devora. I deeply when Virgil endorses him the last time, it made me doubly suspicious, right? This time, Virgil's commendation doesn't seem weird in the same way. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think him getting royalties from the publisher is necessarily counts here. Yeah. Well, Stephen, yeah, it's true that confession is supposed to lead to absolution, penance and absolution, rather than condemnation. But of course, it usually happens outside of hell, right? I mean, Dante can't give absolution to a damned soul, even if, or especially if it was the Pope. Yeah. But I mean, you're right. In that way, it's not an exact parallel, and he's not adopting, in fact, the whole point of the priest, like the point of the sacrament of confession is the absolution that comes afterwards. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Yeah, I think. Oh, David, I think maybe you're right. Yes, I did. Okay, so let's stop here. Pause for a second, that is. And because Devora was asking about this too earlier, so I did skip the bit. Sorry. The stuffing in bit. When the reason that the Pope with whom we are speaking here is expecting the footfalls of Boniface is that when the next dude comes, the next dude gets shoved in and the old Pope gets packed in, gets stuffed down the hole, and then Boniface apparently is going to be there with his legs sticking up and his feet on fire. I remember when I was an undergrad, taking my undergrad Dante course. It's the first time I ever read Dante. My professor was telling me that he had recently been to one of his first ever Italian Dante courses, where he was or not courses, conferences. He went to Italy and attended a scholarly conference on Dante among Italian scholars over there. And he was saying that it was a weekend conference, a 2-day conference, and the entire subject of the conference was debates on this passage, specifically on the question of the words that Dante uses to describe, which, again, sadly, I've forgotten to quote here the English translation of, the words that Dante uses to describe the pushing through of the popes into the whatever kind of caldera is underneath the, baptismal font hole that they're stuffed down into. There was this hotly divided debate between half of the room who were strong proponents of the understanding that the popes were getting packed in to a small place and sort of compressed together, and others that they were being pushed through into a bigger space. So when the Pope is pushed through, the last Pope, does he fall into a cavity? Or is he jammed into a pot and packed in really tight? And they apparently, the Italian Dante scholars spent the entire weekend debating that particular question. It all hinged on 2 words. Anyway, yeah, Devora, I think I think it's more or less what happens. I think Devora says, I had an image of him falling directly from Minos head first and popping into the hole like Minos is hitting a hole in one. Yeah, exactly. Minos, I think, has great aim, and it's interesting, Devora, thinking about that in distinction to the suicides, right? Who, remember, when they fall, the emphasis was on the randomness of the fall, wherever they Minos chucks them down, and wherever they happen to fall, they take root, right? And the emphasis there was it's the sort of more arbitrary, or apparently arbitrary anyway. This certainly seems to be not arbitrary. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. So what does this mean? Well, what is the significance of the procession of popes stuffed in head to feet? Well, one thing, I don't think Dante says this explicitly, but it's hard for me to imagine that the feet, the burning feet of the previous pope, are going to be mercifully extinguished at this point, that his feet are only on fire so long as he's the one with his feet sticking out, and that once he gets pushed through, his foot burning torment is done. I wouldn't think so. We don't see... Have we seen any? The only... Sorry, let me attempt to finish a sentence. Have we seen any examples of tormented sinners in hell whose suffering receives alleviation at some point? Stable alleviation, an alleviation which is not itself part of the torment, if you see what I mean. Because I don't remember any. The only one that I was just kind of thinking about for a moment, the only counterexample I can think of, is the sodomites, the runners, right? But that's not exactly an alleviation of their suffering so much as they'll suffer worse if they stand still, right? They can make it easier for themselves by carrying on running. But again, the carrying on running is part of the, part of their punishment, part of the perpetuation of their sin itself. So I don't think that counts as sort of an alleviation. Yeah. I do think, David, that that's involved. The idea David was talking about, one pope following in, as it were, the footsteps of the other, and so getting pushed down adds to the punishment because the popes induce their successors to sin. I would have to think so. I would have to think that if the torment meter of the previous pope who gets pushed down is changing, it's going up, it's not going down. I don't think he's achieving some kind of relief of his suffering. I think it's going to be intensifying over time. But the other thing, David, that I couldn't help but remember or think about, which I'd never really thought about before, but being forced into a tight space to lie face to feet with somebody else, it's not a happy situation to be in necessarily, but it's a lot less happy if the other person's feet are on fire, right? So are the feet of the previous pope actually burning the face of the pope that follows him? I guess I'd have to say yes. I suspect. Anyway, again, he doesn't say that explicitly, but I don't see any reason to suspect that the foot fire is extinguished when they're pushed through or jammed down. Yeah. So the way in which that tracks, David, as you're suggesting, of like simony as a kind of perpetuating system, right? That one of the evils of committing simony is that you are perverting the office itself, which makes it therefore that much easier, at the very least, that much easier for your successor to also be guilty of that same sin. Possibly even goes further and makes it difficult for your successor to forbear from that sin because of the circumstances that have been created. And so the way in which, if they are kind of lined up in some, or even if they're stuffed together, you would think that the burning feet, whatever kind of space they're being pushed down into, because I don't want to hazard an opinion on that sensitive subject. But anyway, however you bring it through, I think it can't be helped, and it's certainly going to be amplifying the suffering of others. Okay. Transitional passage. Ah, Constantine, what wickedness was born, and not from your conversion, from the dower that you bestowed upon the first rich father. And while I sang such notes to him, whether it was his indignation or his conscience that bit him, he kicked hard with both his souls. I do indeed believe it pleased my guide. He listened always with such satisfied expression to the sound of those true words. There's your commendation by Virgil, right? The silent approval of Virgil on Dante's pontifications, as it were, about simony. And then he gathered me in both his arms, and when he had me fast against his chest, where he climbed down before, climbed upward now, nor did he tire of clasping me until he brought me to the summit of the arch that crosses from the fourth to the fifth rampart. Brief note on the dower of Constantine. Of course, the reference here is to the famous gift of Constantine. Constantine, the Roman emperor who converted to Christianity. This was the actual. I'm not talking at all about historically what actually happened with Constantine, because that's not important. What is important is the medieval tradition about the gift of Constantine, which is what Dante is alluding to here. And the medieval tradition of the gift of Constantine is that when Constantine, the conversion of Constantine is seen as the turning point when Christianity ceased to be the downtrodden, often kind of underground religion of the Roman Empire and became the official religion of the Roman Empire. And again, but it's not the conversion. It's not that is the problem. The problem is that, again, according to medieval tradition, Constantine gifted the church with vast sums of money and tracts of land. The conversion of Constantine was not only when the church became accepted, and became sort of the official religion, again, in medieval tradition, but that was a good thing. But the gift of Constantine is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's not a bad thing for him. Like, it was a good impulse on Constantine's part. Constantine isn't condemned for what he did, but there are many who make comments along these lines saying that the gift of Constantine was a bad thing. Like, in retrospect, that was a really bad idea. A wealthy church is a problem and creates problems. And again, Dante, far from unusual in kind of pointing that out or condemning that. Okay. Yeah. Stephen, I like that. Stephen is still thinking about the connection between the feet and the Gospels of Peace. I think the kicking hard with both his soles, this image of him kind of futilely kicking his feet and not being able to do anything or go anywhere, right? Again, as this sort of inversion, again, of like, you know, how beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news, as Sarah was quoting. It's supposed to be like the feet are emphasized, are connected with the gospel because you go to bring the gospel to others, and they now have lodged themselves, right? The result of their simony, right? The perpetuation of their simony is that they have lodged themselves head down. They can't, no matter how they kick their feet, they can't move. They can't bring, just as they did not bring, peace to others. Just as they didn't wash anybody's feet, Michael, as you were remembering. Now they can't. Their feet are hot, and they can't move. And we can see the sort of frustration there. Virgil's commendation and this, like the ascension of Dante here, right? Virgil clasping him in his arms, clasping him against his chest, and lifting him, carrying him up, back up onto the arch, because he does descend. This is the first of the pockets that he's descended down into. Nor did he tire of clasping me until he brought me to the summit of the arch. I don't know what to make of this, mostly because I don't know what to make of Virgil's role in this whole stanza. He's quiet. Dante does all the talking here, right? This is not one of those places very often where as happens very often, I mean, where Virgil is explaining stuff, right? You know, like, here's who this is and here's what his problem was, and let me teach you about why that's a big deal, right? I mean, as we've seen, that happens a lot during the course of this, but we don't get that here, right? Dante's all over this, right? If there's one sin he's pretty clear on, it's simony, right? And the problem with Boniface, and yeah, Stephen, that does make sense. It is specifically a Christian sin. It's in that way sort of outside Virgil's experience, right? Where Dante has much personal experience with it, not of, you know, the guilty kind, but of the innocent victim kind, right, as he would say. So yeah, maybe Gerald, as you were saying, maybe he doesn't really understand simony. I don't know. Like, I think he gets it. Like, he knows a great deal about Christianity now, and about the church now. But even though he didn't when he was alive. But again, it certainly in that way is sort of not odd that he should not be saying that it should not be Virgil who is explaining simony. Doesn't itself seem strange, but that's why I don't fully get this visual image. I don't understand why in the ending of this. I mean, on the one hand, it's like a kind of ascension, right? While the popes are going down and being pushed down further still, Dante is lifted up. So we certainly have this sort of the reversal of the papal motion there. Dante separating himself from the other popes. And this, of course, has very frequently happened. Dante sees these people, and even when he's kind of implicated or when things look bad or questionable, nevertheless, at the end of the day, he's still the one who gets to move on and keep going, and not remain there and be punished. But Virgil's role in that. And I mean, this is, we've seen Virgil protecting Dante. Remember, with his hands over his eyes, lest he look upon the Gorgon, who may or may not be there, Medusa, who may or may not be there. We've had him covering Dante from the stinging tail of Geryon, right? He's interposing his own incorporeal body between Dante and the tail of Geryon. So we've had this kind of protective gesture, even that embracing gesture, a couple times before. But yet, why here, and how is that relevant here? Stephen is suggesting, Dante moves on with the help of someone else. He doesn't move on by his own power, bought or otherwise. So again, Stephen, you're suggesting it as, again, a kind of reversal of, like, in himself and what happens with him and to him here. He's sort of indicating or modeling the opposite, right? Like, here's how it's meant to work, guys, right? You don't try to enrich yourself. You are taken and you are lifted not on your own power, because you can't do it yourself. No. Yeah. Now, and Serena, yeah, I don't know what to make of Virgil's non-corporeal physical assistance, right? I mean, we get this. One could be forgiven for forgetting that Virgil does not have a physical body, right? I mean, he seems to interact with Dante. Even simple passages like, I'm going to take off my belt and hand it to Virgil, and he's going to take it and chuck it down into the abyss, right? Even in moments like that, the two of them look equal, on the same footing, right? We do get reminders that Virgil is this is in fact one of those, right? Why can't Dante go up? Well, it's too steep for him, right? But Virgil can make it because he's incorporeal. So, okay, he can just kind of work his way up the side because he doesn't have a body to weigh him down. He has Dante's body to weigh him down, but that's apparently not a problem. I don't know. And yes, David, there's also Geryon is also presumably incorporeal, but Dante can ride him. And the centaurs, yes. Yeah, or even the boat. I mean, the boundaries of physicality. This, by the way, all I'll say, because I have no pithy conclusion to offer on this subject, all I will say is this seems to me a very interesting theme, like large theme. The question of corporeality and physicality in Inferno. And this touches on several different elements, right? On questions that we've been asking about the physicality of the tortures. Like, why is it that almost all of the sufferings of the people are rendered in these crudely physical ways? Why is there that kind of apparent translation of a spiritual sin into a physical act that we get consistently? So again, it's a spiritual place, and yet it's physical in all of its manifestations. Where are the boundaries between the physical and the spiritual with Dante and Dante's body and Virgil's body and the boats that they ride in and the centaurs who give them rides, David, as you say? And what does that mean? What is the significance of physicality? And then place things like, and how does this connect? What does this have to do with Jesus and the incarnation, which it seems to do, with the parallel between Dante and Jesus and the whole crucifixion, Holy Saturday parallel thing that's going on here in Inferno? And remember things like the landslide that lets him, Dante, climb down, because Virgil doesn't need it, down into the seventh circle as a result of Jesus's arrival. So, yeah. So I don't know, but I do know that that's a really interesting topic. It would be a good Myth-Moot paper, Devora, though the more I keep talking about that, the more it's beginning to sound like a good master's thesis instead of a good Myth-Moot paper. But because it's a big topic for sure. And goodness, you could write a whole doctoral dissertation on that. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, sorry. I'm sure there are lots of things that have already been written on this. But that doesn't mean there's not something interesting still to be said, nor to discourage anyone else from doing it. So that's my hope. Again, as I've been kind of suggesting all the way through, I am very much not full of answers when it comes to Dante. But if I can maybe suggest some interesting questions for people to continue to ask, well, then at least we've accomplished something. Okay, let's see how far we can get into Canto 20. Because I actually don't have all that much as far as volume of passages that I wanted to discuss from Canto 20. Lots of landscape description in Canto 20. I mean, Italian landscape description. Anyway, I was already well prepared to stare below into the depth that was disclosed, where tears of anguished sorrow bathed the ground, and in the valley's circle I saw souls advancing, mute and weeping, at the pace that, in our world, holy processions take. As I inclined my head still more, I saw that each, amazingly, appeared contorted between the chin and where the chest begins. They had their faces twisted toward their haunches, and found it necessary to walk backward, because they could not see ahead of them. Okay, so this is another one of those passages. This one and the next, this pocket and the next one, are two of those places where we get it takes a while to disclose with it. We don't lead with the sin and then describe it. We lead with the description of the punishment and then eventually mention what the sin actually is. Kind of like we saw that model for the first time in the third circle, right? With gluttony. Okay, so first let's focus on what he sees. Souls advancing, mute and weeping at the pace that in our world holy processions take. So they're walking slowly, right? That was sort of like you're imagining them walking slowly with a kind of stately tread, right? The souls are weeping. They're mute and weeping. They're experiencing anguished sorrow, we're told, and they're mute. They don't speak. They can't speak. And they're moving along at a slow processional pace. But he kind of buries the lead here, right? The amazing thing is that their heads are twisted around backwards. Yeah, their heads are twisted around backwards. Their faces twisted toward their haunches and found it necessary to walk backward because they could not see ahead of them. And of course, he goes on to the graphic description of their tears running down their backs and down the cleft of their buttocks, right? It's very descriptive as to how their tears falling behind them instead of going down their face and onto their breast. Their tears dribble down their backs because their heads are twisted around backwards. So the weeping is a major emphasis. The muteness is a major emphasis, which certainly seems relevant once we learn who these dudes were. And of course, the turning of the head around backwards. So now we get a new context there for the holy procession, right? Holy processions, why are they walking with a sort of slow shuffling gait? Because they're walking backwards. This is deeply there's a violation of the integrity of the human body here, right? They are walking slowly because walking backward is awkward. Now, on the one hand, if your head were twisted around 180 degrees, it'd be a lot easier to walk backward than it is now, right? Walking backward wouldn't be nearly so awkward if you could see where you were going the whole time. But still, the point is, human body not designed that way, right? It's still awkward to walk when your body is pointing the wrong direction. Serena, I am Serena's asking lots of questions about magic in particular, which of course, Serena, I'm not surprised by. Serena's currently writing her dissertation on magic rituals. But I'd be careful here, because I'm not very convinced that Dante's super interested in magic in this circle, really, at all. Yeah, I don't think he's interested in magic here. I understand. I like the connections to your own research. I am not surprised, and I can see them. And I'm not saying that there's no possible connection here, but I don't think it is. I don't think we see much. I don't see much reason to believe that it is sorcery itself, or black magic, or perverted rites, or Black Sabbaths or something like that that's being condemned. That's not what he describes. That's not the pattern that we see. We'll see more in a minute. Right, exactly, Serena. Okay, well, hang on a second. Well, let's keep going. So they're turned around. So we have this literal twisting of the human body, right? These people are not functioning the way that they are supposed to function. Their bodies are turned around in the opposite way to their heads. And notice the way that he describes it. I saw that each amazingly appeared contorted between the chin and where the chest begins. Okay, there's an Italian word for neck, which he could have used. Why is he so indirect there? Why, contorted between the chin and where the chest begins. They had their faces twisted toward their haunches and found it necessary to walk backward. Here's my theory. My theory as to why he doesn't mention necks there. Why he's evasive about the neck. I think the reason he's evasive about the neck is that to talk about their neck, it's a question of agency. They had their heads twisted toward their haunches, right? Their faces have been twisted around backwards. If you're talking about the neck, it might make it sound like they did that, right? And then they were twisting their necks around. They're the ones doing the action. Right? They had their faces twisted toward their haunches. The area between chin and chest appeared contorted. Again, it's an action being done to them. So the twisting around of head and body is something that's being done to them. The walking is their volition. They found it necessary, as a consequence of the twisting of the head, to walk backward, because they could not see ahead of them. So it seems like there's this separation between the twisting of the head and the walking, right? The walking is what they have to do now in the conditions in which they find themselves. But the twisting of the head is definitely a condition in which they find themselves, and which they didn't do. They didn't choose. And again, this seems to me important, because people's actions contributing to their torment is a thing that we've seen many times, right? If we saw people who were constantly twisting and contorting their own necks to turn their heads around backwards, that would be something. That would be a little bit unusual, but so have been many of the things that we've seen. But again, that's not what we get here. So what does this mean? What are we talking about here? It still has not yet been revealed what their sin is. May God so let you, reader, gather fruit from what you read, and now think for yourself how I could ever keep my own face dry when I beheld our image so nearby and so awry that tears down from the eyes bathed the buttocks running down the cleft. Of course I wept, leaning against a rock along that rugged ridge, so that my guide told me, "Are you as foolish as the rest? Here pity only lives when it is dead, For who can be more impious than he who links God's judgment to passivity? Finally, a hint, anyway, at what their sin was. May God so let you, reader, gather fruit from what you read. Oh man, whenever Dante addresses the reader, I always get edgy. And now think for yourself how I could ever keep my own face dry. Why do I get edgy when Dante addresses the reader? Whenever Dante says that he wants us to take a particular point, right? Whenever he points at something that he's saying and says, may you understand this and profit from understanding this. I always feel like I'm under so much pressure. I'm like, oh man, I'm supposed to get this. What happens if I don't get this? It's really bad, right? It creates this, I don't know. I find this intense readerly pressure. But anyway, think for yourself how I could ever keep my own face dry when I beheld our image so nearby and so awry that tears down from the eyes bathed the buttocks running down the cleft. Of course I wept, leaning against a rock along that rugged ridge. Now hang on a second. Let's go back a minute, because there are two things I wanted to look at briefly in this first passage. The second, well, okay, I did it first. The second that we get, the first that I discussed, is the image of the people, the twisted head, the people with their heads twisted around backwards. But the other, look at the actions that Dante does. I was already well prepared to stare below into the depth that was disclosed. So he's looking down, right? Where tears of anguish sorrow bathed the ground. And in the valley circle I saw souls advancing. As I inclined my head still more, what's he doing? He's craning his neck, isn't he? Right? Dante draws all this attention to what he's doing with his own head, right? First looking down, right, into the pit below him, and then he's got to incline his head still more. He's got to crane his neck in order to see them properly, right? And then having contorted his own neck, he's now weeping like they're weeping and asking, how can I? And he's leaning his head against a rock. We got more leaning going on, more. It's not a contortion. Leaning against a rock isn't a contortion. It's obviously not the same. But once again, we have Dante gently kind of caught up in implication with the folks that he's looking at, and Virgil rebukes him this time. Devora, he's not having any of it this time, right? Are you as foolish as the rest? Are you as foolish as the rest, Dante? So what did these people do? What did these people do? How do they link God's judgment to passivity? It will only be clearly spelled out when we get to the exemplars. But yeah, these are diviners. These are prophets, false prophets, presumably. People who predict the future. And Virgil immediately goes to the theological problem with this. Who can be more impious than he who links God's judgment to passivity? Who claims that they know what God is going to, and that God has no choice, right? Like it's just, people have said this is what's going to happen, and God's like, well, okay, I'll just do it because you said it has to be, so all right. There's a presumptuousness there. There's a near blasphemy there in linking God's judgment to passivity. The idea of determinism, ultimately, as I mentioned before when we were talking about the popes, is this is the sin of the people there, basically, or at least that's what Virgil points to, right? And there are, Serena, getting back to the whole Simon Magus and the Magus half and the Simon half, right? The diviners, these false prophets are also putting, remember one of the things that we've been noticing all the way through Circle 8, all the way through the Malebolgia, is that ultimately all of the sins, all of the fraud involved is not just fraud in the sense of telling lies, right? Putting forth a false face and concealing what is true. It's all been about defrauding by committing fraud. It's been about money. I don't want to oversimplify, but money has been involved every single time, right? Even in the seducing and pimping, money was involved. And flattery, certainly money was involved, and simony, obviously money is involved. And even here, because these people are, making their careers and reputations, they're not being fortune tellers for free. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Serena's saying, that's why the church around this time was deciding to ban the practice of astrology, not in general, but only if it A, denied God's power, B, denied free will, or C, ripped people off financially. Yes, exactly. Astrology has been a vexed topic through the whole history of Christendom. On the one hand, condemnations of astrology are strong and old in the history of the church. St. Augustine, for instance, really strong on the astrology is wrong train. He speaks against astrology very strongly. So you've got one of the four Latin fathers who spoke in completely unequivocal terms about the wickedness of astrology and attempting to, predict the future through astrological projections. That's on the one hand. But on the other hand, the abstract idea that the future is written in the stars, that God's providential plan for the universe is contained within is kind of encoded into the universe, was a really attractive idea, which fit with people's concepts of fate, free will, and predestination, with Boethian concepts of foreknowledge and providence. So it might seem like, why is this a controversy? Like, especially St. Augustine was pretty clear. He's like, look, don't do this whole astrology thing. It's wrong for all these deep, for all these clear theological reasons. It's not only a pagan, which of course in St. Augustine's day, which was the 300s, was a more present deal than it was later on, exactly. But he was on the one hand just trying to separate them, like, Christians don't follow in these, these Greco-Roman traditions. But also theologically, for these same reasons. It denies free will. It denies the freedom of the will of God, even. So no way, can we just do out the astrology? But again, no, it wasn't that simple, because again, this idea that God does know the future, right? And that it's kind of connected to the doctrine of the two books, right? Which says God wrote two books, right? The Bible and the world. The Bible and nature are the two books that God wrote. And so the idea is God wrote about the future, about his providential plans for the future in both of his books. And so therefore it's not impious. It's not blasphemous. It's not merely pagan to look to study the natural world and attempt to draw conclusions from it about the future. So again, it's one of the reasons why it kind of dies hard. But anyway, so, and yes, as Serena was mentioning, Dante, astrology was super popular in Florence at the time. It was a major issue, a major contemporary issue. And as Berolini states very strongly, Dante rather conspicuously says very, very little about astrology. I mean, if he were going to speak against determinism or against fortune telling, claiming to see the future and its links to determinism and denying the freedom of the will and the will of God, if he had material to work with, plenty of material to work with, all he had to do was start condemning the actions of the actions and the words and the teachings of the astrologers, many contemporary astrologers there in Italy. And he doesn't do that. A little bit, but not much. I mean, there are a couple astrologers, contemporary astrologers, who get mentioned there at the end of the canto, but he doesn't. And instead he focuses on fortune telling, like prophet figures from mythology. And specifically from, not just from mythology, but from classical epic poetry tradition. He goes back to Statius and to Ovid and to Lucan and to Virgil, the big four of the Latin world, big four epic poets of the Latin world, and invokes fortune tellers from those four works rather than from contemporary Italian, than leaning on contemporary Italian history, which would have been plenty. And of course, Berolini is also talks about the early post-Dantean tradition that one of Dante's Italian commentators in the next generation, because Dante started getting commentaries immediately, like with people who were still alive when he was alive. One of the first generation commentators on Dante claimed that Dante himself kind of dug astrology and was himself at least mildly tainted by the sin that he's describing here. And so, is that part of why he doesn't, take more shots at Italian astrology because he was kind of cool with it? I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion about this myself. I am not sure. And remember, as always, especially when I'm disagreeing with people who actually know what they're talking about when it comes to Dante, grain of salt. But within the state of my own ignorance, this canto doesn't feel to me like he's dodging that. I don't see that. I don't feel that here. I don't see his emphasis on the classical epic poets as an evasion of the predestination thing, of the determinism issue associated with astrology, specifically, and fortune telling and the foretelling of the future in general. It can be read that way, but that just does not feel to me like a compelling reading of this stanza. And here's another thing. The business with his neck in these stanzas, right? He not only, if he is implicated, if he is connected, he's fessing up to it. He's not hiding it. He's fessing up to it, right? The connection between himself and these folks, the sympathy, the pity that he feels for them, the fellow feeling he expresses as he looks upon them and is rebuked by Virgil for that. It just does not strike me as him, as this. It's just one of the reasons why this does not feel to me like a pay no attention to the man behind the curtain kind of moment in this. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and Serena, you're absolutely right. Serena's also talking about uh, the, the overlap between the science of astronomy, and which of course they would is not how they would have said it, and the art of astrology. There's not a sharp dividing line. I mean, nobody's gonna mistake an astronomical, like a modern astrophysicist with a tabloid astrologer, right? Those two things don't look at all alike in the modern world. They look much more alike in the medieval world. Very, very much more alike. It's all about the careful scientific study. Part of what the impulse of astrology was understanding how the heavens worked. All it takes is one further step, right? First you observe how the heavens move and how they operate. And then it's just one small step to say, and those things are significant, right? And we can draw conclusions from the observations that we make when we're making those. So there's not even a leap. There's not even a wall of any kind between astronomy and astrology. It's almost like theoretical and applied science, basically, right? Astrology is just applied astronomy, and astronomy is largely often motivated in order to apply it in that way, right? Like, it's why we pay so much time looking at the stars, because we do believe that the heavens, and especially the way, remember my explanations about the heavens and the movements of the heavens, and this, it really should, like up there in, above the circle of the moon where things are unchanging and perfect, if we can see and understand how God, the motions that God has set there and the way that God has set them, we should come to understand something more about God, which maybe we can understand better by looking at that than we can by looking around, the fallen world around us here. So anyway, yes. So yes, absolutely. We can, one of the things, Serena, that we can say about that is you can kind of get a whiff from afar of Dante's interest in astrology by all of those astronomical passages that we've been looking at, like when he tells the time by telling us where Pisces is and everything, and in that passage we were looking at before. It's those things are intimately connected. Yeah. And yes, and then you get, Serena, you're also right. Serena, I knew you were going to be all over this canto. You're also right that there is a profound connection between divining and writing poetry, especially when your poem is about an eternal future afterlife. Absolutely, yes. And notice the way that this gets kind of brought in. Let me jump forward a second. Virgil's really long speech about when he tells the story of Manto the sorceress, right? And Manto the sorcerer, this is important. This is personally relevant to Virgil in two ways. One, he is from Mantua. He's talking about his hometown, right? For one thing. The foundation of Mantua, named after Manto, and he's telling like the real story of Manto and her connection with the founding of Mantua, right? So again, it's personally relevant to him, and so therefore we get the first connection between this sort of fortune-telling sorcery of Manto and Virgil himself, right? The Mantuan, the most famous of all the Mantuans, but more. At the end of his story about what happened with Manto and Mantua, he says, "Therefore I charge you, if you ever hear a different tale of my town's origin, do not let any falsehood gull the truth." If ever, Dante, you hear anybody tell you a different story about Manto, you make sure. Don't be taken in. Little quiz. Where do you think one might hear a different story? In the Aeneid. Virgil is correcting himself here. In his poem, he told a different story of Manto and the forming of Mantua, right? So this is Virgil correcting the Aeneid, as Berolini points out more explicitly than he did. There are other places where he's pointing out contradictions, right? Or where, we are made aware of contradictions or sort of, corrections of the Aeneid over the course. But this is extremely, conspicuous, right? Virgil correcting his own poem was wrong. So Serena, coming back to your point about the connection between poetry, divining, and writing poetry, Virgil was a false prophet, right? Well, a false historian. He was not looking backwards. He was not looking forwards. He was looking backwards, right, at the history, and he told the wrong story. So when poets lie, which, oh wait, they do that all the time. It's kind of their job, right? That's what you do when you write fiction. You lie. Which, of course, remember Geryon, right? And Dante's own concern about his commedia, and swearing by his commedia. Anyway, and I, O master, that which you have spoken convinces me, and so compels my trust that others' words would only be spent coals. I am so convinced and compelled. I trust you so much that I am never going to believe you again. It's essentially what he's saying there, right? You, Virgil the shade, I believe, and so therefore I will never believe Virgil the poet ever again. But tell me if among the passing souls you see some spirits worthy of our notice, because my mind is bent on that alone. Oh, good. Yeah, let's not think about anything else whenever we do. Yes, Stephen, Virgil's old boss would be down here, the witch who summoned his shade. Yeah, I would think so. I would think that this is where Erichtho would end up, though you never can tell. Like, sometimes Minos throws you a curveball, right? But I would think so. Yeah. So, Leanne, exactly. It's really Dante that's correcting Virgil. So Dante in his poem is correcting the Aeneid, but he's not just correcting the Aeneid. He is, in his poem, having Virgil correct the Aeneid and then saying, I will always believe this new version because of the great trust and faith I have in Virgil, right? So, talk about having your head twisted around backward. So, Stephen, what an interesting question. Is the wringing of necks associated with divination at all? I don't think so. I think you wrung the necks of birds when you sacrifice birds. But birds, the connection between birds and divination is not usually sacrificial, but rather observing their flight. In traditional pagan divination. I guess if you were reading their entrails, Serena, you'd wring their necks first. But that's not the. You more often, birds, you tend to observe their actions, and livestock like bulls and sheep, you tend to read their innards. At least that's not exclusively, but yeah. Exactly, Stephen. I was remembering in Leviticus the birds' necks are wrung for the sacrifices as well as I believe when birds were sacrificed in Greco-Roman tradition as well. But yeah, I don't think so. So, circling back. Gosh, is it conspicuous that I'm like walking backwards in these slides and craning my head around to look back at the things we already talked about so frequently? I'm uncomfortable now. But anyway, I'm not far enough back yet. Now that we know more about what the sin is, back to the punishment, right? Back to their torments. Here it's even easier, I think, to see how this is a perpetuation, right? They are meant to, they were craning their necks around in a direction they weren't supposed to go. They were claiming to be able to see the future. They were going past. They were claiming to have vision that would see forward beyond what humans really should be able to claim to see. And their punishment is to have their faces turned backwards. That by itself looks like a reversal rather than a continuation, right? Because you tried to look forward instead, I'm going to twist your head around backwards and make you look backwards instead to reverse what you did, which is not the pattern that we've generally seen. And that would seem to be even further supported by what I was emphasizing about the passive, like, having their agency and having their heads turned, right? They're not craning their necks anymore. Now their necks are being craned for them, right? But in the end, I actually don't think this is a reversal. I think that this is a continuation. That what's important is what they are doing. That is in the walking backward. That I don't think he is saying, you who claim to see forward shall now as punishment see backward instead. I think that this image of them with their heads turned around, it's in the next one. Yes, I beheld our image so awry, right? It's the distortion of the human form that gets to him, that makes him weep, right? The distortion is like the act of foreseeing, the act of divination. That is a distortion. A distortion beyond of, like, humans are not supposed to do that, and they're not walking forward into the future. This is like the reality that was underlying it, right? They're not looking for, they are claiming to be this sort of like semi-divine power, the semi-divine ability, right? I am looking forward to I'm looking forward into the future, and I shall tell you what shall be. I shall, to use Chaucer's famous phrase, I shall peer into God's privité, which of course is also a dirty joke in Chaucer, because Chaucer. But anyway, I'm going to peer into God's privité and tell you the secret things of God. So they are sort of posturing themselves in life in this sort of quasi-divine position, but in fact, they're not greater than divine. They're less than human. In fact, as we've seen so many times with so many of the sinners, the posture that they put themselves in is actually a wrenching of their posture, a wrenching of their being, and the shambling backwards, where they claim to be going forward into the future and saying that they know what is to come. In fact, they're, staggering along backwards. That's what they were always doing. It wasn't true. It didn't work. Like, they did not know the future. They could not succeed in, as Virgil says, linking God's judgment to passivity. God's judgment was not passive, even if they tried to depict it that way. Well, it's, yes, good, exactly. Stephen says God can see past, present, future all at once. They're not God, and so trying to do what God does make them twist horribly, or rather, they have been twisted now. Their physical twisting now reflects the inward twisting that they were already doing before. So, okay, anyway, let's, we should stop. We're going late here tonight. Almost finished what I wanted to talk about here in Canto 20. I didn't get to the classic exemplars, but maybe we'll do that next time, and kind of wrap this up and move forward. But anyway, thank you so much. I'll try to get my head on straight and move forward next time, at least. And hey, I didn't get cut off in the middle this time. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining me again tonight. And don't forget, I will see you. Don't believe the schedule. I will see you next week. Change of plans for the good, and I'll be here next week. So thanks, everybody, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye now.